It's alive.
It picking up sounds as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
We are going to start on 5 minutes, everyone. So if you're getting coffee, there are seats in the market quite well. Some of that starts 5 minutes. Thanks.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, you're live on the internet.
Just as a sign.
I think the question actually, I don't think they
So all of the discussion is just going to be when they're sitting.
as far as I know, the best person to ask you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you. Welcome to St James's and the Sheriff Centre. It's wonderful to see so many people here tonight to grill our parliamentary candidates. Also good to welcome many of you, perhaps who haven't been here to the Sheriff Centre before. Can I just explain what this place is? As well as being a functioning Church of England parish, this also hosts West Hampstead Main Branch Post Office, as you can see behind you, and a rather fabulous children's soft play centre. And all the profits from this organisation goes to a separate charity which provides social care and support within this local community. So unlike some coffee shops, which I noticed one or two people are drinking their cups from sitting to my right, if you buy a cup of coffee here tonight, or indeed the next time you come back to business again, you will know that your money will not be disappearing offshore. This is Holy Week for us Christians. It's the week in which we follow Jesus' suffering to the cross, which strikes me being slightly appropriate for our candidates tonight. I hope you don't give them too rough a ride. Jonathan, who's going to chair the meeting, will keep you, I hope, in control. Just a couple of housekeeping notices. The cafe is open if you want to get a drink or something to eat during the evening. The loos at the back through the first set of sliding glass doors and through the wooden doors. And if there is a fire, which we're hoping there won't be, that's a fire exit, that's a fire exit, and of course the way you came in is also a fire exit. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Let's try that again. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the West Hampstead Live Hustings. Big thank you to Father Andrew and the Sheriff Centre for accommodating us, and to Guy the Cafe for working late for us as well, and also to Hunter's Estate Agents who took the cost of much. I'm Jonathan Turton. I run West Hampstead Live, new community website and tweet Hampstead. Most of you probably know one of those two things, and I'm going to be chairing this evening. A couple of quick words on how to run. Each candidate's going to get 3 minutes to give you their pitch, their spiel. And when I say 3 minutes, I mean 3 minutes. There's going to be alarms going off, buzzers, they're going to stop. We're going to try and crack through this, I think. We're then going to break the evening into 3 sections of questions, local, national, international. Each time you have a question to ask in the right section. Obviously, there are grey areas, useful common sense. But we're trying not to kind of jump around from Syria to potholes and climate change and so on. It's also absolutely fine to ask a specific candidate a question because it doesn't have to be the whole panel. I've asked the candidates to keep their answers as short as possible. See how that goes. I also would like you guys to help out and keep your questions as short as possible. If your question doesn't start with what, where, who, why, when, or how, rethink your question. I know from interrupting you, I know from interrupting them. And those multiple part questions with anecdotes, and just ask the questions. We are webcasting tonight's proceedings. Tom is doing over in the middle there. I hope that's okay there, but if not, you have some time to raise your hand. And we're also photographing as well, and there's various bits of media around, I think. We tried to webcast the local election hustings, the Wi-Fi failed. That was the Catholic school, now an Anglican church. Let's see if they're doing better with Wi-Fi. Okay, let me introduce the candidates very briefly, and then I'll talk about the spiel. So on the far end, we have Martin Noahs from Liberal Democrats. Next to him, Magnus Nielsen from UKIP. In the middle, Chilip Sadiq from Labour, Rebecca Johnson from the Green Party, and Simon Marcus from Conservatives. And Simon, we're going to start with you. Okay. Let's check this
This is working, yes. Well, good evening and thank you everyone for coming here tonight. What a fantastic turnout. My name is Simon Marcus. I'm the Conservative candidate here. I was born and bred in Hampstead and Kilburn. I grew up here, went to school here, and I live actually just up the road, so I'm very proud to call this place my home. A bit about my background. My father came to this country many years ago to become an NHS doctor. And my mother is a local campaigner who for many years has fought against now-rent councils to save our local heritage and services. My mother's parents, my grandparents, grew up in the East End during the Great Depression and fought against fascism in that time. So really, I was taught to stand up for my community. And that is the foundation as to why I'm standing here in front of you today and why I would like to be your member of Parliament. But I'm not a career politician. I've spent most of my life in small businesses, paying wages, creating jobs, and after that I founded a charity called the Boxing Academy, where we gave a second chance in life to young people who've been excluded from school, many were involved in gang crime, and really felt they had so little chance in life. And we really, I'm very proud to say, get 90% of our students a better future and return them to education, training, and employment. So I felt very much I had the skills, the experience and the values to contribute to politics. As a local councillor here, I've certainly helped support local people as much as I could, trying to fight back against unwanted planning applications, whether it's Liddell Road or 100 Avenue Road. I tried to stand up for local people there, fought for cleaner streets, more police on the beat, cleaner air, fought against HS2, and so much more. But whether we're talking about our local services, or police, or school places, it all comes down to a very simple decision that we have to make just a few weeks' time now. And that is who to vote for. Whether we vote for a party that still won't admit they spent too much, a party that wrecked the economy.
Rubbish.
Ed Miliband said,
the economy.
Give us 3 minutes. Questions come later.
Whether we vote for a party that said we go back into recession and we're wrong. So unemployment wrong, and we're wrong. So the economy wouldn't grow, and we're wrong. Our choice is to hand the keys back to the people that crashed the car, or vote for a strong economy, for strong leadership, respected both at home and abroad, both for David Cameron and the Conservatives for a better future for all. Thank you.
Please don't heckle during this 3-minute bit. It's not going on there, they probably timed it. So, there'll be time for questions afterwards. Rebecca, just go next.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you to West Hampstead Live. And the coffee's great. Much, much better than that, than the foreign stuff. I'm Rebecca Johnson, and I'm standing for the Green Party here in Hampstead and Kilburn. Kilburn was the first place I actually lived in and rented a room in when, after we got rid of the cruise missiles from Greenham Common, and I was finally freed up to try and rebuild my career. And while I was there, I fell in love with swimming at the Women's Pond, the Kenwood Ladies Pond, joined the Kenwood Ladies Pond Association, and those two sides of Hampstead and Kilburn in a way have been very important to me ever since. But I couldn't even, when I came to want to buy and find somewhere more permanent to live, I actually couldn't afford Kilburn at that time. I could only afford Hackney, which at that time was described as crack capital of Europe, and so a one-bedroom flat, on my maximum mortgage was possible. And so I've come back here just across the North London line. I don't live here, but if I were privileged to have your vote and become your MP, I would move here, because I think it's important to have that embedded. Now, why do I want to be the MP here? Well, I think the British politics needs more Greens in Parliament. We've seen what the one Green MP, Caroline Lucas, can do in terms of raising the local issues around, the closure of hospitals, the closure of post offices, the closure of schools in her own area, and turn them into national issues that represents a challenge to the austerity agenda that blames the poor for the rich bankers playing casino economics with the subprime mortgages across the US and most of Europe. The Green MPs have an analysis that goes right from what we need to do to protect our environment, to prevent, to stop climate change, to stop further climate change, right down to what we need for safer streets, lower transport in our streets, safer streets altogether, child-friendly streets, for affordable housing with rent controls. We'll probably get some questions on these. Obviously supporting the NHS to be free at the point of need, as it always was intended to do, to bring our transport back into public ownership, to get more people out walking, cycling, and on public transport. And of course, our precious green spaces like Hampstead, who would protect. I was out there, at the council meetings, trying to stop that iniquitous decision going through that has been felling our beautiful trees on Hampstead Heath. So I would be both a local MP, and my whole background has been actually in international security and disarmament with the UN. I've had to chair meetings that have had the Iranian ambassador, the Israeli ambassador, the Egyptian ambassador, and half a dozen more, and I've managed to keep order in those kinds of meetings. You can bet I'd be a clear, strong, brave, courageous voice in Parliament, able to be representing your needs and have to be taken very seriously by whoever is in the government. So I will be able to influence whoever ends up forming the government after we have a hung Parliament in
Thank you, Rebecca.
Good evening. Thank you very much for turning up here today. My name is Tulip Sadiq. I'm running to be your Labour MP in Hampstead and Kilburn. I grew up in the constituency and I've lived here since I was a teenager. My parents got married in the constituency in the 1970s, and I used to write for our local paper, the Ham and High. And I also live in West Hampstead now with my husband. In my early childhood, my family moved away briefly, and we lived in different parts of Asia, like Brunei and Singapore. My father had a stroke, and we had to pay for a lot of healthcare in the different countries that we lived in. As a teenager, we moved back here, and my father got a lot of very good caring treatment under the NHS, and it made me realize the value of public services and realize that it didn't matter in the waiting room how much money you had. Everyone got the same kind of treatment under the NHS. So I then joined the Labour Party. Like a lot of people, I don't agree with every single policy of the Labour Party, but I agree with the overall values of social justice, of equality, of fairness, and that's why I joined the party. I went to work for Amnesty International straight out of university, and I worked on the trafficking of women from the Roma community into London, especially during big sporting events. And I worked to see how we could better help these women, stop them from leading a torturous life, which is what they did when they were trafficked here. I then went to work with corporate social responsibility, where I worked with firms like Rolls-Royce to ensure that people from state schools, the students who were studying, got a chance to go to the apprenticeships and internships that were offered by Rolls-Royce and companies like Network Rail. So education is very important to me. Access to education, whether it's secondary, whether it's further education, is very important to me. I was also a Camden councillor for a long time, in charge of a £22 million budget, where I was in charge of all the pubs, the cultures, the libraries, the art centres and museums. Difficult time to be a councillor, an £18 million shortfall, but we tried to do the best we could. If you decide to elect me, the things that are important to me is public service, the NHS, banning 0 hours contracts, paying the London living wage, not just the minimum wage, making sure that our post offices, our GP surgeries, our police stations are all not savagely cut and closed, and making sure that we reduce the gap between the rich and the poor. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Right, my name is Magnus Nielsen, and I'm standing for the UK Independent Party for this constituency of Hampstead and Kilburn. And the reason why I'm standing is very simply the reason why so many of you are here, simply to represent one of your representatives into Parliament. It's about democracy. And my reason for opposing British membership of the European Union is that we have fundamentally no democracy. We have a system of government, or I would call it misgovernment, that simply makes rules up for itself and is not held accountable to the people of the country. This is something I learned way back in 1975, because I go back quite a long way. I actually voted for to remain within what was then considered to be the common market, the European Economic Community. And having voted to stay in, I then started doing some investigation into the history of this organisation and how it was structured. And I came to realise, in fact, that there was no accountability. I mean, I was looking at the arguments then put forward by people like Tony Benn and other people who were going the No campaign, and I started to see that what they were saying made a great deal of sense. So that is why I joined the UK Independence Party when it started, and that is, although we have a whole range of issues within the party, that is the one that I most wish to campaign. I want to restore democratic of the government to you, the people of Hampstead and Kilburn, to you, the people of Britain, and that is why having a party like UKIP is so very important. People ask us and say, well, what happens when we get out? Well, very simply, I would thought, very simple. We have so many people, so many countries in the world that have actually established their independence from Britain, like the United States, or like India, Nigeria, and all their countries in what are now the Commonwealth. I would thought it's very much a left-wing issue, but for some reason, in the public mind, it's a right-wing issue. And I would think that reasserting the right to govern yourself is very much a radical issue, and that's very why the line that I want to take. I would like to see this country. I look at examples of countries like Singapore, which is just really a small island that started out as a member of the Malaysian Federation, and then decided they would do better on their own. Singapore has made tremendous strides over the past 20 or 30 years, and we in this country have very much more going for us than Singapore. We have, for a start, we speak the English language, which is now the language of commerce throughout the world. So immediately we have access to markets in America and in Canada and Australia. But let's not forget the fact, or overlook the fact that China, on present trends, is going to become the world's largest English-speaking country by the year 2030. We have tremendous advantage from this country. We have a whole tradition of initiative and enterprise, and that's really what I want to build upon for the future. So that's why I'm standing for UKIP and why I'm putting myself up as your candidate.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Majid Nawaz. I'm the Liberal Democrat parliamentary candidate in this constituency. I want to speak to you a bit about myself, who I am, and why I'm a Liberal Democrat. First of all, who I am. I'm certainly not a career politician. In fact, I had spent 13 years of my life, my teenage years and into my early 20s, campaigning as a political activist against the democratic system. I was a young radical working within my communities to challenge the democratic status quo, a bit like Russell Brand, except he came to it later. That landed me in prison as a political prisoner in Egypt for attempting to incite against Moscow before the Egyptians did the same thing, but came to it late as well. Amnesty International eventually adopted me as a prisoner of conscience, and I spent the next 4 years studying, thinking, rethinking, debating, in effectively what was a political education for me. And then when I left, upon my return to the United Kingdom, I landed on Kilburn High Road, and that's been my home for 6 years until I got married, and then I relocated within the Camden Borough in my marital home, and this is where I live. But I arrived at the democratic process. I arrived at wanting to engage with democracy, having realized that actually it's the way we bring change and we take it for granted. And now I spend much of my life having founded the world's first counter-extremism organization, working within communities to challenge Islamist and far-right extremism, encouraging other young people to engage with the system rather than engage against it. One of the biggest issues of our day. So that's a bit about me and why and how I came to politics. Why am I a Liberal Democrat? Well, I had enough of my religion. And I decided actually what we need more of is sensible, centrist, pragmatic thinking. And as well as my respect and my appreciation for the human rights discourse and my interaction with Amnesty, and the fact that the Liberal Democrats have been consistent in their stand on human rights issues and on liberalism, as well as that leading me to the debates, actually I thought about the influence that this particular party has on moderating the ideological pendulum that we've become accustomed to in the United Kingdom. We had 3 terms of Thatcher, 3 terms of Labour, and we swung from the left to from the right to the left, and we know the consequences of that. I'm particularly proud, as the leader column in The Guardian recently stated, and the Financial Times, of the moderating influence that the Liberal Democrats have had in government. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would ask you to prepare for another coalition, because I think it's almost inevitable, especially with the effect of the SNP on Labour's vote in Scotland. And I'd ask you to consider the fact that despite and against all odds, the role the Liberal Democrats have played in government in stabilising our economy, in fact, in helping to bring about the fastest growing economy in the G7, in helping to bring about 2 million jobs, and in helping to set us on a path to recovery. And if it wasn't for the Lib Dems in coalition, then I also ask you to consider how far to the right under Osborne we would have swung. And that's why I encourage you to vote Liberal Democrats in the most marginal seat in England, where the difference between the three main parties is only 841 votes. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, candidates. Right, we're going to start with the local questions, which we have anything to do with West Hampstead, the constituency, or even London-wide. So they include things like division of local services, working with council pollution. There are also overlaps of things like HS2 housing, that's fine. We're looking for local context, but we'll be flexible. I was going to have the opening question, but there are so many of you, so I'm going to scrap that and go straight to you guys. We have a microphone for you. Nikki is at the back. One of these particular microphones are the held ones, so you have to hold it up to your mouth to speak. And I say, please keep your questions short, please keep your answers short. Who has the first question? Right here, right here.
Hello. Do you, this question to all of you, do you agree with TfL's plans to change the bus routes in the East Scotland and West Hampstead area? Do you agree with that?
Did everyone hear that? No. The question was, do you agree, the candidates agree with TfL's plans to change the buses in the West Hampstead Swiss Cottage area? I think it's a straight yes or no. Yes or no question. Okay, let's go straight on the line. You don't know, just say don't know.
Actually, I'm going to be honest.
No, it's a yes or no.
To be honest, actually, I need to look into this, because I haven't really looked into the details, so I'm certainly back to that.
Okay. It's not for me. Okay, you don't know.
Bus number 13 being scrapped. Of course I don't agree with it. That's a bus I use. Lots of people in the area use it. Already resist TfL. Express my concern. Do not agree with scrapping the number 13.
13 is my lucky number. I don't agree with it either, but I want to actually do a little bit more research and see whether there were possibly a way to look at the bus services more effectively.
Okay, fine. Yes, no.
13 bus was the first one I ever went on as a child, so no.
Okay, Rebecca, did you know about 13 bus before you had said 13 bus?
Yes, because I read the local press.
Okay, good. You want any follow up on that? You're happy with that? Okay, next question. Yeah,
I'm rather loud, so I think I can do without your microphone. The Tory on the end. You said that you were against the Little Road housing. The Tory on the end. You said you were against the Little Road housing. Yeah. So Dick, you've been against. Sorry, Tulip, you've been against it. Yeah. Given that you're against these houses, and my premises will be affected by that scheme. What are your proposals to tackle London's dire housing need? All I ever hear from my politicians locally is opposition.
Simon, you want to take that? I think you were the first to get used.
I think I'm not going to get your votes there, but I'll try. Actually, the Conservative Council Group campaign to have a higher proportion of social housing in that development. Smaller town block, but more social housing. But it's quite true. There's a huge problem in this area. And
you still oppose the development. You said that yourself.
Let me answer, sir. There is a huge problem with social housing in London and around the whole country, actually. And there are several ways of dealing with this very complicated situation. Now, anyone who knows my work as a councillor knows I know many developers. We've got to get developers building, we've got to get councils working with developers, and we've got to get local residents on board so that compromises can be made. So, as a government, we've tried to reform planning laws. That's caused difficulties to a lot of people, but it had to be done. 2, we brought in the new homes bonus, so that local councils get billions from central government the more homes they build. And thirdly, we brought in the neighbourhood development forums to give you a say in where these new houses are built and how they're built, and the ability to object if you so wish. So that's not the answer to everything, but it's a good start. And house building is ticking up, and again, with a strong economy, sir, with a strong economy, it will continue to tick up, and in the next Parliament, that's one thing I'll be committed to, is more housing, more social housing, and more affordable housing.
Thanks for your question. I didn't oppose the building of the school places, and I just made that clear. I did think we needed more school places after the government cut our building schools for the future funding. So I do think we need school places. What I objected to specifically was the lack of affordable housing on the site. And I have now lobbied, I'm not part of the council anymore, I have lobbied the council constantly. I've been given reassurance that 156 Western Lane will be 50% social housing, which you probably know sites, and that's what I've been. But I'll give you a more detailed answer on Labour Party's policy about house building, because you're right, we do need to build more houses. I'll name a few things, but obviously there's lots more. The first thing is, at the moment, the planning laws are heavily weighed in favour of developers. So what developers can do is they can buy a piece of land, they can leave it empty for years and years on end, and nothing gets done about it. What the Labour Party has said is that they will give councils the powers to take that piece of land back after 2 years if nothing's been done on it, and they can build social housing on that site. The second thing they've said, the Labour Party, is that councils will be given the chance to restrict where properties are sold and who they're sold to, so they're not all sold to foreign developers abroad who buy properties for speculation and just buy them and leave them empty. Those are 2 things. The third thing is, Camden Council, whether you like it or not, has been upheld as a model of house building in the whole country because it's built more houses as a council than any other council. It may not be enough, I agree with you on that, but it still has built houses, it's going to build 3,000 affordable housing in the next few years. The plan was a community investment program. You look at an asset, you knock it down, you rebuild it, you build 50% social housing, 50% private housing, and it didn't happen on Little Road site, which is what I objected to, the lack of social housing. I did not object to the 420 new school places which are going to be built for our school children in Camden.
Housing obviously is a big topic, so I will get everyone to answer this, but that's a 2-minute maximum on the answers. Thanks. Yeah, Rebecca?
Yeah, the Greens would support quite a lot of what Labour is proposing to do about housing, increasing social housing, increasing house building. By the way, Camden hasn't actually, there have been some new statistics that have looked at councils that have claimed to have built houses using money that they've received from Right to Buy, and actually Camden is one of 10 councils that has grossly exaggerated the number of houses that it's built. So what I want to talk about are 2 areas in which Greens would actually add to the resources available. And one is we would end the so-called Right to Buy. It has been a disaster for social housing. A lot of that housing has actually ended up back with private developers, often within just 1 or 2 sales from the social tenants that bought. You can't expect, councils to be putting a lot of money and investment into building good new housing for the needs of people if the first family that goes in there gets lent money by a bank, buys it, and then of course it ends up probably, or in a lot of cases, with the bank or with private developers. So we would end that. And so that's one very important thing. We would also be looking at ending empty houses, making sure that they become occupied. And on rental, we would we've learned from the great cities of Europe into where there's a lot more renting that is possible, but we would have to do that by having rent controls and also tenant security. So we would institute those two requirements, so that rents would come down, would be more stabilized, you wouldn't get this overheated kind of market that, frankly, our prices for a lot of people here, and particularly the next generation, and and frontline workers, like nurses and the nurses and the teachers and so on. So those are the two additions that we would put, but we would support Labour and push them to be more radical.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you. Well, from experience with past Hustings, I realise I have to be very careful in my choice of words when dealing with this question. But the fact remains the same, that one of the reasons why we have such a high demand for housing in London is the fact we've had virtually an open door immigration policy for such a long period of time. And that, when you start bringing in numbers of people, we have a population in Greater London now of 8.5 million people. That's the highest it's ever been. It's going to be 9 million by the end of the decade, and probably 10 million by the year 2027, which just means that you're pouring in more and more people into the country, and that is automatically, by the laws of supply and demand, we're going to force up the price of housing. So one of the policies of the UK Independence Party is to bring immigration back down to the manageable levels that we had prior to 1997, and we believe that is going to alleviate a great deal of the problem.
I'd like everybody to remember the words Little Road, because you're correct, there has been a significant betrayal and duplicity in the area, over this development. Basically, we hear a lot about promises that are made by the council to build affordable housing. You hear the 50% ratio mentioned often, but Little Road has only had 4% social housing, affordable housing committed by the Labour Council in this area. And that 4% is 4% because the council has chosen to profit by £15 million because of the private developer money, instead of making it 50% affordable housing. The reason I care so much about this is because I'm a renter in the area who attempted to buy. I mentioned that I got married. I attempted to buy when I got married, and I cannot afford to buy a home in the very constituency I'm seeking to represent. I personally feel affected by the situation. 156 West End Lane.
What's the policy? The question was what policy is. What are we going to do with the
156 has been empty for 2 years. So let's not buy any of the words we hear when they say that they pay attention to affordable housing and to developing in the area, because it's simply not happening. In terms of policies, there are a few things we Liberal Democrats have proposed, as well as 90,000 affordable homes, 90,000 right to buy homes, reports about buying coalition government. We've committed to 300,000 new homes. We've committed to garden cities. But what I would also personally encourage, I think, is because this is something that affects an entire generation, is I think we need, and I mentioned this before in Hustings, we need a cabinet level Secretary of State for Homes and Housing, so that we have somebody as an electorate to hold accountable for this generational betrayal that we are all witnessing, because it doesn't just affect other people, it's affecting everyone. And we need to start looking at this very seriously, and I think this requires a cabinet level position, and that's something I'll be taking forward personally.
Thank you very much. We have a question over on the side.
I have a question. What's going to happen for housing for disabled people? I live in a flat where my doctor's note saying that where I'm living at, it's saturated my asthma, unfortunately, in 5.5 months. It's not a good place to live. Now, I remember the right to buy when it came out with Margaret Thatcher. I'm in my 50s now, and I haven't had an appropriate place to live in all these years. And I don't want to keep moving. I don't want my house getting worse. And then talk about not having enough social housing. There definitely isn't enough people with disabilities. And when I said I wanted to stay in the area because I know people, it's awkward.
Yeah, okay, so the question is what do you do about social housing, specifically about affordable housing?
So this is a very important issue because there's a disagreement even among the coalition about the spare room subsidies, because that of course affects disabled people who need more room. So the Defence has put forward a policy to say that actually both people that need the room because of disability or because of children or any other reason will be exempt from being forced to move out of their flats. as well as those who need to move out. You need a bigger place. Yeah, you need the roof. So the other thing that actually, yeah, absolutely. And the solution to your particular problem is increasing the supply of housing. And, you know, I'm actually really frustrated at the fact that we're just not seeing that across London, in particular in this constituency.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I would just quickly go on to what I was saying previously, that we're going to...
Can you be specific about disabled housing?
Well, disabled housing, and for the idea of people who are disabled or people who are living on the welfare state, that we have to look after those people who paid into the system. We give a preference to that. People who have actually paid into the system should get the benefit. We have a national health service, we don't want to turn it into an international health service for everyone else.
If I grew up with a disabled father, I've seen the effects that housing, transport, access to religious institutions, anything can have on disability. So I'm fully sympathetic with you. Let me tell you a few things. The bedroom tax that Majid just described, I will not take any lessons from the Lib Dems or the Tories on people having to leave their homes with disabilities. The number of people who come to my surgery who have a spare room because they have a carer staying there occasionally, or because they have equipment that helps them and are being forced to move out of their homes, and sometimes to properties where there isn't even a one-bedroom property waiting for them. So the first thing the Labour government will do is scrap this one-bedroom tax. I can assure you of that. And secondly, have you looked at the coalition's record? The Independent Living Fund has been scrapped. The Disability Student Allowance has been scrapped. People who are disabled are 30% less likely to be in employment than someone who doesn't have a disability. And what have they done? They've cut 1 in 5 of disability workers in job seekers, in job centres. Do you think that's what we should be doing? Not only that, if we talk about transport, this is one topic that's very close to my heart. It's cut the access for all funding, which makes
what are you going to do?
So I think, hello? I think first of all, we're going to get rid of the bedroom tax. That's the first thing. But also, when we build more social housing, you're absolutely right. It doesn't matter which party is in government. We have to make sure that they're wheelchair accessible, but also that the bathrooms and the rooms and suites for people who can actually look after themselves. Because the one thing I've realized is that disabled people do not want to rely on other people to look after themselves. They want to be independently living. And I'm very proud that we've actually opened a new centre for independent living just down the road here that can actually help people look after themselves. So you don't want to be relying on other people, and we're fully aware of that.
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, we would absolutely end the bedroom tax. This fell disproportionately on disabled people, as we've already heard, and also on older people who wanted to have a room so their children or their grandchildren could come and stay. It was a cruel, unnecessary tax, and it has to be ended very quickly. But you also talked that there are different kinds of disabilities, and we should put a duty on council to find out what it is that disabled people need. Some who are wheelchair bound need wheelchair accessible housing, and that's really important. That needs to be every new build ought to have a certain number that are built specifically with wheelchair accessibility in mind. But you've talked about the mall. Now what's that? That's damp housing. Well, what the Greens would do on that, and it's what we would do in any case, because it's also about how to end fuel poverty, or to tackle fuel poverty and help the environment, is that we would be giving grants and subsidies to the council to put into social housing, or to people to put into their own private housing, to get damp proofing, to get insulation for the walls, to therefore make the houses drier, better able to stay warm on much less fuel. That's one of the ways that would actually help people in your particular situation. So there's a whole mix of things, but those are two of the ways that we try to tackle it.
Simon?
Well, first of all, I'm just incredibly sorry for the trouble that you've seen. What I would say is we have actually increased disability payments for many people, those visually impaired, those with mental health issues. But what's important to say is that so much of this money, whether you're talking about carers, or you're talking about equipping accommodation correctly for those disabilities, it goes through the council. And the council have to make a decision as to how it's spent. That leads me on to the answer to your question, which is how I will help you. When yes, funds are scarce. I make no bones about that. As a counsellor, I have helped people with mental health issues. And yes, I have helped people who are confronting the spare room tax, the bedroom tax, which, by the way, I would have opposed. And it would be my job, as your Member of Parliament, to talk to the council, talk to the local health, social care, the local services, and make sure you've got a better deal. And that involves getting people together, fighting your cause, and hopefully not letting you down. That would be my commitment to you.
Thank you very much. Do you have any other housing questions? We can move on. Let's move on. Oh, is this, sorry, okay, here we go. James, that's terrible.
Hello everyone, my name is James. I'm the chair of the local neighbourhood forum. As hopefully most people know, we spent the last 3 years drawing up a neighbourhood plan for Portugal Green and West Hampstead.
Question, James.
Two quick questions for you. Do you support the community's efforts to draw up a new neighbourhood plan, the plan that we produced? And secondly, do you pledge to campaign as part of the for a yes vote in the referendum on the neighbourhood plan, which will happen on the 9th of July? Thank you.
Okay, so that's very simple. 2 yes/no questions. First up is pretty quick. Do you support the plan? Rajiv?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Magnus?
Yes, I support citizens taking initiatives in their own community.
Gina?
Yes, of course I support it. I've been to as many meetings as I possibly could have gone to, and I'll be supporting it if I'm elected as your MP. And more power to the community and to the local people.
Yeah, it's a very long-winded yes. Rebecca?
Yes, very impressed. Lots of good green ideas in there. I would support it, and I would support the adoption of it.
Simon, you need the microphone less than anyone else.
I will not use the microphone. The answer to the question is yes, absolutely, and yes, absolutely. I'm very proud that the Conservative group is supporting the NDA all along the way.
Okay, thank you very much. Question right here.
One of the biggest areas of development housing-wise currently is Kilburn Avenue, the south side and the north side, the former King's accommodation. That's going to put massive pressure on school places in the area. The current school on Kilburn Avenue is 9 times oversubscribed. Will you support their plan, the one-side opportunity for them to expand onto the Mount Animal site, which is coming up for development right now?
Okay, Kilburn Avenue. It's a little, it's across outside the West Hampstead patch, but I think we'll allow the question. Simon.
Well, absolutely. I've worked with St Luke's for a year now. I fought their cause at the Department of Education. I'm leading the Secretary of State, Nicky Morgan, to get my absolute support for that plan, and to use that also. So, by the way, that's where I live. I look onto the proposed site. So it's something I'm absolutely passionate about. It is an amazing school. I hope my children may go there at some point. I'm sure we get the council, Mount Animal, and Mayor of London and DFE together. We'll get a great solution for it. Absolutely.
I don't know enough about it, so I would need to find out, and I want to talk to the locals, and I want to find out what might be some of the controversies around it. And if I would do that, then I would come to a conclusion.
I've been in extensive conversations with Penny, who's the chair of governors. I know that it's a brilliant school. I've spoken to Camden Council about it as well, who actually gave you a very glowing reference. And so, I wasn't quite sure how they were going to react to it when I asked them initially. They said they're very pleased with the school, does a lot for the community, and I've already written back to people who've written to me to say I would support the expansion. I have written to Camden Council to say I'll be taking this position, and Mayor of London, DFE, if there's anything we can do, we definitely want to help. We realise it's oversubscribed. Lots of people who live around me actually go to that school, and they're doing a brilliant job.
Right, well, like Rebecca, I also read the newspaper, local newspaper, but I'm also a bit uncertain, I haven't heard much about this as I should do. But on the basis of what you say, yes, it sounds like a good idea, and I support it.
Absolutely, sir. School shortages are one of the biggest issues in this area. In fact, with the Little Roadside, one of the things we were campaigning for was a new independent school, whether free school or not, or under the local council's authority to be built there. I would support the extension of this particular school. I've personally also brought members of the DFE into the area to discuss with local community groups about school places. And I think it's we're in dire need of more school places in the Borough of Camden, so I would support this.
Okay, thank you very much. The question up here.
I'm very proud of the youth that have turned out. I'm very proud of the youth that have turned out here. And my question is really for them. With the cuts that have been proposed, how would you make the youth and children's services available to our youth? Thank you.
Good question. Nadine, you have a microphone, you can go first.
I think it's really important to look at the youth issue, and I think with the scarce money that's floating around at the moment, we have to allocate in the best way possible. So what we've done in government, is we've prioritised free school meals for millions of children in primary school to make sure that they have a fair start in life, even if their parents cannot afford to buy them the healthiest of most nutritional diet and get that in the schools anyway. The other thing we've looked at is apprenticeships for young people to make sure that actually 2 million apprenticeships are created across the nation so that they have employment opportunities. I think it's crucial. When you look at the course declared and the tuition fees is something that always comes up, and everyone's aware that he's apologised for that. But one thing that's important to understand is that actually, unless students earn over £21,000 a year, they absolutely nothing back on this. It's not a perfect system. I wasn't involved in those coalition negotiations, but at the same time, we've got to recognise that university prices have actually gone up rather than down, and that's a huge number of those in the increase have been people, university students who come from diverse ethnic minority backgrounds. So it hasn't affected too much, thankfully, applications to universities. Personally, as well as building on policy, this is something I've been very, very vocal about. I think that youth participation in democracy is one of the most important ways to make sure that the youth voice is heard. I've been participating in a lot of youth hustings, whether that's been involved with Twitter and Channel 4. Last week I went down to the youth hustings there, and they've seen that, they've seen it tweeted out. And it's outside of the constituency, but I did it because of my passion for youth engagement in democracy. Aside from that, I went over to End in Queen Mary's University with a few MPs on the panel with this organisation that works again to get youth to participate in the democratic process. So it's something I've been engaging in beyond the constituency. And the key proposals that I put forward that I will be campaigning on, if I have the privilege of being your member of parliament, that I believe that the voter age should be reduced to 16, because the younger people begin to vote, the more likely they continue to vote throughout their lives. I think that in fact, also, we should, I don't, for the life of me, I can't understand why general elections are held in May, when everyone from the age of 16 to 22 is engaged in final exams. I think we should move them out of May and put them into a time when young people can actively participate in the culture around the election, such as hustings, debates, canvassing, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Very quick. Basically, my general statement, made a very good, intelligent answer to that question. I don't think I want to add to it, otherwise I'm taking up time.
Sorry, that's the same answer from me, I'm afraid. So, one of the things I'll say is there's a lot of talk about how cities reaching record highs and economies improving. What doesn't marry up quite so well is that when we were on the council, there's an £18 million shortfall, and now there's a £73 million shortfall in the next 4 years. And what happens is when the top falls, it tends to fall on things like youth services, because they're discretionary services and they're not statutory services. So what we need to make sure is that local councils are not seen as a soft target and are funded properly so that youth clubs and youth activities are funded well. And secondly, listen, the Labour Party supports votes at 16. So if you're 16-year-olds, you can vote. And I'll tell you why that's important. Politicians make policies with an eye on the ballot box. Why do you think older people's services get protected and educational maintenance allowance gets scrapped and housing benefits for 18 to 25-year-olds get scrapped? It's because young people don't go out and vote. So I'm encouraging you guys and forcing you guys to say, go out there and vote. When politicians make decisions, they'll look at you guys and they'll make decisions knowing that you're going to vote. And secondly, tuition fees. I know Nick Clegg let down the entire generation by doing a U-turn on the tuition fees. But Ed Miliband has said we will cut the tuition fees to £6,000, which is not as much. We should cut it down even further. I agree with you, but at least it's a start. Me, I'm sure all of these guys enjoyed university at much lower fees, and you guys shouldn't have to pay more. So we are on your side, but please make sure you go and vote, otherwise things will never change.
Please believe in lifelong education, recognise that people want access to education at different points in their life in different ways. And so I was very proud to be a sponsor for a resolution that went through the last Green Party conference that was actually about providing free universal child care from 1 until access into school at 5 or 6, depending on what age that is. That is a charge that's incredibly important for the young children's learning, that then is an investment in them for the next stages, but also for parents, many of them are young parents, to get access into work and so on. So that's one thing. The closure of youth clubs, I tend to agree with Labour. I would very much support some of Labour's solutions on that. Closing youth clubs is incredibly short-sighted because we never hear young kids, teenagers being demonized because they're hanging around street corners or getting into crime or getting into gangs. But what are we providing them for? To provide them with fun and sport and games and socializing and theatre and arts and all those things that youth clubs can be part of providing. So absolutely, this the councils need to have ring-fence funding that keeps those youth clubs open. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Well, I have a slightly different take on this because I ran a youth club for 5 years. As I said, Boxing Canada was a charity I founded. It was in Tottenham. We opened another branch in Hackney. This began in 2006. And the reason why I have a slightly different take on this is this, because back in 2006, we were in the middle of a global boom, yet funding was still short. And what did we see at the end of that, around 2010, in some of the most deprived areas of London? We saw rising inequality, educational failure among young people, a rising crime rate, family breakdown, and really, very much what I saw on the front line was a broken Britain that you heard so much about in 2010. So I was very interested in finding solutions to that and giving young people, the most disadvantaged young people in society, involved in gangs and the youth justice system, people who really everyone has forgotten about. How do we change their lives? It was a charity, it was the third sector. We were inspired, we were able to go in there at grassroots level, go door to door, get kids to come to school, change their way of seeing the world, teach them the values that so many of us in this room were taught, and that gave us a chance to succeed in life. What I learned was, you can throw money at a problem, but if you aren't teaching the skills and the values that matter so much, you're not going to get very far. And we proved it. We managed to get our students 5 GCSEs, get 90% back into education, training, or employment for around £10,000 a year. Now, the pupil referral unit, the state of that costs well over £20,000 a year, tragically, in most cases, with total failure and wasted lives. So what I would say to you is, the money goes from government to local council, and they have to allocate it to how they spend it. And what I would say is, a very small amount of money goes an incredibly long way and changes a huge amount of lives. I know it, I've seen it, and it's all around here. I work to make sure it happens all around here.
One more local question, then let's move on and get through this. Then I think we'll move to national after this. We can get very short answers here, please.
Hello. So, elephant in the room. Mansion tax or charge on high value properties? Quick questions. Do you agree with it? At what threshold? And how would you assess the value of houses?
Okay, that's 3 questions. Let's try and answer them succinctly in one. We'll go back down the line again. Yeah, we'll start with you.
The answer to your question is, let's take a step back for 1 minute. The mansion tax is being introduced to fund the NHS. That's the first thing I'm going to say. There's no doubt about the fact there's a funding gap. The answer to your question, I I think the mansion tax is not an ideal solution, but what are we going to do to fund the gap in the NHS? 500 GP surgeries have already been closed. People are waiting in the A&E because they can't be seen. 1 in 9 people will be turned away because they can't see a doctor in the next 3 years. So my point is, it's not a policy that is an ideal solution, but it is one thing that the Labour Party will be doing to fund the NHS. In terms of thresholds, it will be if you own a property that is over £2 million, you will be paying £250 a month. Do not believe these fake mansion tax, council tax letters that are coming through your doorstep in brown envelopes from the Conservatives, scaremongering and conflating mansion tax and council tax. Do not believe those. It is if you own a property over £2 million, you will pay £250 a month, not £3,000 like they're pretending. And lastly, if you are income poor but asset rich, I have pushed airballs over and over again to see if we can provide protection for them and defer their payment. And I've also asked them for another policy. If you bought your house a long time ago, 40, 50 years ago, as opposed to 5 years ago, will there be a difference? And those are the things I'm fighting for. So let me come back to it. Not an ideal policy. I'd like to know what the other parties are going to do to fund the NHS. And again, to reiterate, it'll be over £2 million properties. Thank you.
Just to do the maths for you, £200 and £2,700. Yes, sorry. You're right, 3,000, sorry. Rebecca?
Okay, let's separate those things out. The mansion tax is a bad, a wrong answer to a very serious question of inequality. And it's interesting that Labour's actually picked up a number of the Green arguments for how you deal with the situation in terms of people being asset rich, because the house prices have got so overheated here that so many people can't afford it. But if you bought early enough, then you're sitting on something that is a major asset. But you can't realise that asset unless you move or unless you die. So that's a really serious problem, and you don't realise it, but somebody does. So what we've got to separate that out. But our answer would be reforming the tax, the council tax banding. That also means that would go into local investments, so that would go into helping to build houses. We would also look at wealth tax and inheritance tax. So we would expect that at the point at which a high value asset is passed on, then I think it's reasonable for a percentage of that to be brought back through taxation into the exchequer to be used for the funding that's needed. But this is not the way to fund the NHS. I'm sorry. And let me suggest 2 ways that we would do that. One is the total tax, the so-called Robin Hood tax. That is a tax on the international financial transactions. This is a tax that would help to stabilize, some of the craziness that led us into this, the financial crash in the first place. A tiny tax on every transaction actually could yield 20 billion or more per year. That would come into our coffers for use of the NHS and for, and for other social needs. So that is one of the things that we would cancel Trident. What is your real security about? It is not about some nuclear weapon, wandering around in the North Atlantic that cannot be used without creating a humanitarian catastrophe, must not be used, that the rest of the world, or at least 150 countries now, are actually trying to get multilateral negotiations going in order to ban and eliminate those weapons for everyone.
Okay, Rebecca, thank you.
Would not support the mansion tax. To answer your other question, what is the value of property? What is the well, this is a whole profession of valuation. The valuer would estate agents and valuers work out what the value of property is. I've got 2 minutes.
Well, less I do.
Less than that. Less than 2 minutes to explain. Basically, UKIP wants to have a much simpler tax system to try, within the short space of time, to try to make taxation falling on those people who are able to pay it. We had a flat tax idea whereby people who are earning less than 12,000 a year would not pay any tax, and then you would put a percentage on those people are over 12,000 a year. I'm sorry, there obviously isn't time to explain this just a slight start and go into it. I think I've bored everyone to death with all being clamoring for the exit, so I'll pass over to someone else.
In answer to your question, no, I don't support tax. I've been long lobbying the Liberal Democrats to change their policy on Vince Cable's initial suggestion that was written on the back of a tissue, piece of tissue, suggesting this idea. I'm delighted that the party adopted this policy because it saves me from having to defend it. I'm happy to report that we've indeed changed policy. It's on my campaign website. We are now supporting a reform of the council tax bands. Currently, there's an anomaly. A house that's worth 2 million pays in terms of hits the highest band in the council tax and pays the equivalent of a house that's worth 22. That cannot be right. These bands are over 60 years out of date. They need to be reformed. What I do not subscribe to is the politics of equity. What I do not subscribe to is the majority of term mansion tax being used on houses that clothes ladies and others have bought and whose value has increased while they've been living there due to no fault of their own. And what I certainly do not subscribe to is London in particular being punished because of the housing shortage and people being taxed in London and then that money being redistributed across the country for the NHS because in fact I don't subscribe to the view that this plugs the funding gap in the NHS. £250 a month will not fund the NHS, unfortunately. I don't think that's the solution. In fact, what it will do is have a damaging effect further on the need for development, a damaging effect on the housing market. Already we can see that, and it will generally overall punish London for people that are due to no fault of their own. So no, I don't support it. I subscribe to the reform of the council tax bands, and that's something which I'm proud to say I've been advocating for in the Liberal Democrats to change the policy on this as a result.
Thank you. It comes no surprise to you that I oppose the mansion tax, but I've got bad news for my Labour opponent because Ed Balls isn't listening to you. He's refused to say anything else about the mansion tax for properties valued above 3 million. Now, it might sound like a lot, but here in Hampstead and Kilburn, that is thousands of people, ordinary people, pensioners, people paying a mortgage, families, and they are really scared. I know many people who've already sold and left the area, selling properties they've worked hard all their lives to afford and enjoy living. And to boil it down to the argument that the mansion tax is there for the NHS is one of the most simplistic, dishonest arguments I've heard in this election. The mansion tax will pay for about 3 days, if that, of the NHS. A totally phony argument. What will pay for the NHS, and by the way, just to settle this argument, in this government, NHS spending went up by £2 billion every year. It will do so again in the next Parliament. But just to settle this argument, the way we are going to finance the NHS and all our public services is by having a growing economy. It is as simple as that. And at the moment, the growth of last year was revised upwards, as you know, 2.8%, the fastest growing economy in the G7. We produced nearly 2 million jobs in the last 5 years, more jobs than the whole of Europe put together. That is how to reduce the tax base to fund the NHS and all our services, and that's what you will get if you vote Conservative.
I'm going to make a point here. The mansion tax is part, and yes, I don't agree with the term mansion tax. I don't think it should have been called that. The mansion tax is part of the money we're going to put into the NHS. I've heard big words from the Lib Dems and the Tories about funding the NHS and the economy growing. What are they actually going to do to put money into the NHS? It's not just the mansion tax. We're going to close the loopholes for hedge funds who at the moment escape stamp duty by shifting the burden onto someone else. They're going to have to pay that. We're putting a tax, a levy on tobacco companies. We're bringing back the 50p tax. These are the actual measures that the Labour Party are going to be putting in place for the NHS. And I think it's absolutely rubbish to talk about funding the NHS because it has never been as bad as it is now. The Royal College of Nursing, the BMA.
Okay, that seems to segue us anyway to reference issue, so we're going to move on to that question. Gentlemen here, you've been waiting a long time. Speak round, please.
There's no more national issue than tax, and this is a question directed primarily at Simon, but anybody can answer it. David Cameron is taking a lot of credit right now for having raised the threshold of taxes so that nobody who earns can eventually over 12,000 a year will pay a tax law. That was a Lib-Dem idea that the conservatives said was not doable. Now that they have credit for it, the question is, in a future government, what is the guarantee that conservative government or the Labour government, without the mitigation of Lib Dems or another coalition partner, can be trusted to go ahead with policies that don't get controlled by the softening of the policy that's in the middle, rather the extreme right and left.
Okay. Simon?
Thank you. Yes, it was a Lib-Dem policy, absolutely, but it was also a Conservative policy. Well, long before the election. I'm sorry, sir, I just respectfully disagree with you. I know because I was involved in Conservative policy making, and there were a great many people within the party. Others within the party disagreed. But there was a strong club of people within the party who absolutely agreed with raising the threshold at which people pay tax. As you may have heard, the Prime Minister mentioned it in his speech, in his conference speech, and it's absolutely a part of our election manifesto. So, as much as you can guarantee anything in politics, I think there's as much of a commitment as we can offer.
It's David Cameron who's been saying, well, not David Cameron, the Conservative Party who've been saying that they're going to have 12 billion cuts worth of wealth from the welfare system, but not actually outlining what they're going to do. So I find it very hard to believe that they're being true about what they're going to do. I suppose the best way I can put it to you is that all the parties have committed to balancing the books by the end of the next parliament. It's about how you do it. And for us, what we believe in the Labour Party is that, do you see public services as a springboard for a good economy? Do you believe that investing in the NHS means that people don't save for a rainy day and actually spend money? Do you believe that investing in education means you produce well-educated people who contribute to the workforce? Do you agree that instead of closing 600 Eurostarts that like the Tories have done, we actually invest in childcare and give free childcare so that parents don't lose the valuable skills that they can bring to the workforce? It's about investing in public services for the Labour Party, and that's what we've done, and that's what we're going to do if we get into government. And we are not going to get into a coalition, I can tell you that. It's going to be a majority Labour government.
My question was, how much are we going to actually be trusting these people down in difficulty? And from, Margaret Thatcher actually did buy that, put through her policy. If you look at Blair, he dragged us into wars of choice that actually contributed to destroying our economy. And then Cameron and Clegg, the coalition, Clegg promised no tuition fees, and then what did he do the moment he went into government? So actually our, first past the post system is one of the things that's got to change. It's one of the things that will re-energize you if they actually feel that if we give them the vote at 16, which I also agree, that they have a reason to be voting, and that can only be brought around by proportional representation, so every vote actually counts, and getting rid of the unelected House of Lords. We do need a second chamber, but we need a second chamber that is perhaps some kind of a Senate of the regions, where people are elected on also proportional representation, and then every vote will count, and you will see people will be re-energized, and certainly youth will really care because their votes will matter. So no, I don't trust the kind of promises that we hear from them. That's why you need more of our small parties. We don't want to go into coalition with anything. We want to do some kind of an arrangement. We will back you on the that way you'll be netting on promises.
So back to the question of tax. Yes, we are proud and delighted that people are claiming credit for our policies. 26 million people have been spared. 26 million people in this country have been spared £905 a year. I'm delighted to take credit as a Labour for that policy. That's 3.5 million people in this country who have been taken out of tax altogether. So please feel free, all of you, to take credit for all the policies. It liberates the most vulnerable in this society, those who are earning the least, and it empowers them economically to spend, and when they spend, as we know, the economy grows, and with growth comes more revenue for the economy, with which we can then reinvest. Now, the Liberal Democrats have committed to cutting less than the Conservatives when it comes to tax, but spending less than Labour when it comes to that pendulum swing that the questioner asked about. We are the moderating force, the centre ground in this coalition, and we will remain so. Let me newsflash, there will be a coalition again. All the polls, every single poll, and the polls are predicting. So we're going to have these. I think that's a good thing. The reason I think that's a good thing is because, as I mentioned, under Thatcher, you know, the ideological agenda to cut went so far. We remember that because she snatched milk from the kids in the schools. That's how far that ideological agenda to cut went. Under Labour, the agenda to grow the state went so far. Again, I personally remember it because I suffered under the so-called War on Terror. Civil liberties were taken away. People introduced stop and search and tax. Right. So what I'm saying is the big state and the small state aren't going to fix this problem. So we are delighted that we play a role in taking the most vulnerable out of tax, and we will continue to play a role in stabilising any coalition going forward. And in such a marginal thing to this, I can guarantee you one thing. Having advised every Prime Minister from Tony Blair onwards, I will be a powerful voice to moderate whichever party is the larger party in this coalition, whether it's on tax or generally on the size of the state.
Thank you. Thank you. If I put a question there, it's a question about how we cope with a coalition government. And, well, tell me what it was, you run out of and what the question was.
The question about the having the extremes of government left and right, and the tax issues that was well, but benefits. What is benefit of coalition to mitigate tax?
I covered that.
Well, then that's fine, then we can move on. Okay, we go one, then you hold two, and then we'll over here. Let's go here first. We'll do one.
Why are there so few women in politics when 50.4% of the population is female?
You all hear that? Why are there so few women in politics when 50.4% of the population is female? Rebecca.
Yeah, I very much support the feminist group 50-50, which is calling for at least 50% of women in Parliament. But we need to change politics, because women go into politics and then they find that it's... Have you seen Prime Minister's question, PMQs they call it? You know, this baying, it's like this public school kind of cross between a kind of Roman amphitheatre and these stupid little jokes that they make, and they all bay. And if you don't join in on that, somehow you're not supposed to be, you know, engaging in the politics. So we have to transform our politics in order to get really good people, women and men, who do not like that way of doing politics. Again, we have to go into proportional representation. I think that is one of the only ways to increase the number of women going into politics, because at the moment the constituency choosing is still biased heavily against women. And but we also have to enable women who go into politics to change the way that politics is being done, because only when that happens. Read, actually, Caroline Lucas just published a book called Honourable Friends with a question mark, and she tells you what it's like to be a woman going into politics, the way that the House of Commons is currently structured, and it is shocking. This is not fit for purpose, and that's why we constantly get into a mess, right and the left. So let's change our politics, and more women will want to stand, and more young people will feel energized, and I hope want to stand as well. And then we can get the policies that we really need to lift this country out of the problems that we've got into.
Thank you. I now
Why are there so few women in politics? Well, I think you could probably answer that question better than I could. I certainly want to see more women in politics than there are now, and you've given that for all the other parties are open. The person who really plays the trail is Margaret Thatcher, wasn't democracy. Can't say I necessarily support all the policies of Margaret Thatcher, but there we are. She was the lady who led the way. I want Rebecca on her estimation of the behaviour of members of Parliament. I think it is extremely childish and political hooliganism sometimes, and it does politics a great deal of discredit. So again, that is something I would like to see reformed.
Stuart?
At the moment, the number of men in Parliament is more than the number of female MPs there's ever been in the British Parliament since it started. That's how bad things are. The Labour Party, 33% of our MPs are female. In the Conservatives, it's 16%, and in the Lib Dems, 13%. We are not in a good situation. There's a few things. Rebecca's already touched on the culture of politics and what it's off-putting. It's off-putting to a lot of women. In Parliament, when I worked there, when I was younger, there was a smoking room, there was 5 bars, there was a snooker table, there was no childcare facilities for women who stayed on and worked very late and stayed on to vote very late. It's finally been opened. It took us till 2010 to open a childcare facility, a nursery in Parliament. Secondly, the gender pay gap. If you actually want to stand for Parliament, there is a long time that you have to take off work because you have to fight this election. And women do not get paid as much as men. And there is a huge problem with gender gap in terms of pay scales. And also, the other problem is 600 show stop centres have already been closed. Women are not going to want to go to Parliament if they can't get childcare. And that is a massive problem. The cuts that are happening in terms of benefit and welfare are hitting women the hardest. Look at the Women Budgets Group report. It is women who are at the bottom of the scale, the ones who are getting cuts in terms of benefits, their life subsidy, working tax credit, everything's hitting women hard. I'm going to end on one final point. It's not just about having lots of female faces in Parliament, which is important in itself. It's also about having women in every stage of the country. In the FTSE 100 companies, only 2 of the women or of the directors are women. In legal firms, magistrates, judges, high courts, there's hardly any women. When I worked in the Labour Party, and things have improved then, it's about every level of the party, press officers, civil servants, special advisors. We need women everywhere. It's not just about representation in Parliament. It's about getting a genuinely equal society. And I'm proud that Ed Miliband is happy to wear a t-shirt that says that this is what a feminist looks like. This is not what we should be shying away from. And we want that from all our male politicians.
So I am not proud that 13% of the Democrat members of Parliament are women. I'm certainly not proud that even less are members of ethnic minority communities. There's a great deal more that needs to be done across all parties, but I'll speak about my own party for both women, female representation, and ethnic minority representation in Parliament. I hope I can go some way to addressing half of that equation. But what I am proud of is the following, that everything that Julian has rightly mentioned about the need for women's gender pay gap to be closed, women on boards, what I am proud of is that Liberal Democrats have tangibly contributed to that aspect. How? Because when you introduce maternity, you liberate an entire generation of women, because the husbands, the fathers, are able to basically claim leave when a baby is born, so the mother can continue working as well, and the burden of childcare is shared between the father and the mother. That's a policy that I'm delighted that the Democrats have introduced, because it makes it easier for women to get on and work. And I'm also proud of our Linda Stone, our female minister, who's worked tirelessly against FGM and other such issues that affect women, atrocious issues that affect women on a daily basis. I do agree that we need PR, we need to reform the electoral system, we also need to reform the House of Lords, and I've been campaigning for that. When that's done, I hope to see more women and ethnic minorities represented in Parliament.
I have a baby daughter who might want to go into politics one day. I'm not sure that she should, but I wanted to have the choice. And I do much of what I've heard actually for my panelists here. I think part of having a choice is about everybody taking responsibility. I, for my part, work in the Conservative Women's Organisation. I mentor young women to help them deal with the raucous, admittedly, scenarios we see on the benches in the Houses of Parliament. Actually, when I left the boxing academy, the person I appointed to run it in a very male-dominated world was a woman. And the next job she's doing too. But actually, it's not quite as pessimistic as you may have heard. In the last 5 years, the number of women on 100 boards has doubled, around 12% to around 24%. For women under 40, the pay gap is now level. It's very much a taking time out from work to have children issue. And that's something I know a little bit about, because my partner is shortly returning to work after our second child. I'll tell you one thing that's making a huge difference. It's the fact that Alison has a choice now. Because the economy is growing, and yes, often that's what it does come back down to, there are so many more jobs to choose to have the flexibility of the working hours that enables her to make the decision she wants. And we're trying to support many working mothers to return to work if they choose. That includes free care for 3- and 4-year-olds, 15 hours free childcare, £2,000 tax relief on childcare as well in the next government, that starting from September. And these are things that make a difference. So yes, I'm absolutely committed to more women in Parliament. I will personally be working on this if I have the privilege to be your MP, or even if I don't. But it's all about, my time's up.
Did that answer your question? She asked if Judith and Rebecca had any reactions to the others' comments. If you do, you can short.
Okay, I think we have to change the structure and the culture of our politics. We have to make...
That's what you said before. If you have any reactions, what to tell or not?
I'd like to see them implement. I'd like to see them change and then get their parties to change the way they do politics. Because unless the parties change, politics won't change.
I very much dispute the figures about, I mean, if you look it up on your phones, all of you have access to your phones, I very much dispute the figures about equal pay and gender between men and women. It's disgraceful, and anyone who doesn't admit it at the moment is absolutely wrong. So please tweet it and make sure that it's correct.
One of the benefits of we can do this real time. There's lots of iPads in here, lots of iPhones. You're welcome to go and research that. And it was under 40, the pay gap is now pretty much level. So
okay, sorry, we have someone's done this.
It's 11.2% to 39. And their report that they pay will see for women.
Can I just make one quick point? It's not about women under 40 or women under 20. It should be equal for men and women doing the same job. It's not about 40 under or above. It should be equal. Men and women doing the same job should be paid the same amount. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. Everyone should agree with that.
Yeah, I second that.
Hi, my name is Tom. I'm an undecided voter, just to give you a broad incentive to answer this straight. If you ask any economic expert, anybody who's top of these crunched your plans, will all tell you that come the end of the election, whichever party is in power, is probably going to have to cut taxes. So, is it on now? Yes. Great. If you ask any expert about the election or about all of your economic policies, there is going to be a big funding gap. You will probably have to cut some sort of tax. Economic growth won't generate the tax you need. It hasn't for the last 2 years. And the mansion tax and wealth taxes won't do it because all the research from every developed country in the world shows that it cannot generate growth.
Okay, what's the question?
So the question is very simple. If you had to raise one of either of the two or lower rates of income tax, if you had to raise, if you had to raise either of the two lower rates of income tax, VAT, national insurance, or any of the taxes that would actually hit most people in this country, which bit will it be? Honest answers, please.
choice between those two only.
Well, I would suggest that what tax you choose to raise will stop. Those are the options that you gave.
Or what else? Right.
Okay. So, delighted to go first. You know, we have committed to raising taxes, and we've been honest about it. We said that we do not subscribe to the ideological cutting agenda on that one. We have said that once the budget puts a balance, we will raise taxes. Where will we raise them? Yes, we have committed to, as well as looking at tax evasion, we've committed to taxing the richest in this country. And that's something which we've been open about. Because actually, frankly, those with the broadest shoulders are going to have the merit and the burden when it comes to taxation. And frankly, once the books are balanced, you know, this idea that the economy, once the books are balanced, that we build the economy with a surplus, it's a novel idea, running the economy with a surplus. But I'm just not sure of the economic sort of legitimacy of this idea. I've yet to come across an economist that actually subscribes to that as a good idea. So I think we would tax the richest in society and look at tax evasion as two examples. As Liberal Democrats policy that's already been put out where we particularly look to raise tax.
Thank you. Just to develop the point which I made a bit earlier about taxation, flat tax means that people say under a nominated figure, let's say 12,000, people earn less than that, don't pay any tax at all. Those people who pay more than the nominated amount then pay tax in a proportion to what they earn. So whether that could be 2%, 5%, 10%, that is something which will have to be decided after the election.
I'll first start off by saying we would absolutely not raise VAT. It's a regressive tax. It hits poorest people the most to spend their money, and it's absolutely ridiculous. I'm getting on, sir, if you want it. And so what we would not do is we would not increase VAT. I've already mentioned a few things we'll do, but I'll reiterate them. One is that we would bring back 50p tax. We would tax bankers' bonuses. We would put a tax levy on tobacco companies. We would tax hedge funds, well, who at the moment have a loophole to avoid paying tax, or shift the burden of the tax. The other thing we would do, one is, what's already started in Camden, we would make people who leave homes empty pay double the tax they already pay, and that's going to be adopted nationally. The second thing is, big companies that avoid paying their tax for the moment. I'll just give you one example. Amazon paid £4 million out of their £4 billion profit. How is that fair? At the moment, if big companies avoid paying tax, all they have to do, they get caught, is repay that amount of tax. And it's a risk worth taking. The Labour Party has said, if you get caught avoiding tax, you have to pay double what you avoided, and then you see the companies talking. So absolutely no to VAT increase, and yes to all the other things I've mentioned.
We support Labour on many of the things that Tulip has just talked about. We would close tax loopholes. I'm proud to say that Caroline Lucas put forward the amendment to close the Mayfair tax loophole, and we would really be backing looking at all the loopholes that are used, whether they're considered quote-unquote legal or not, because that is one of the ways. We would not raise VAT. Actually, we would take sanitary protection off VAT. Why? A sanitary protection being VAT. This is a tax on womanhood. Our major thing that is different from all the other parties is the total tax, the Robin Hood tax. This is something that the other parties just haven't got their heads around, and they need to, because this, would make a huge difference also in how international economics can be given more control and get less overheated, and it would generate, as I said, up to 20 billion, we think more than 20 billion per year into the tax exchequer. That's a lot. And yeah.
Simon?
One thing I learned from my time in business is that a lot of the experts are wrong. But to answer your question, I think that if the economy grows as forecast, I was absolutely forced greater tax in one particular area, we're talking towards the end of the next parliament, I'd probably increase corporation tax for large businesses. I think they have the broadest shoulders and could take that burden. And on that subject, I think one of the things that I'm quite proud of that we've achieved is that under this government, 1% of the wealthiest pay 30% of all the tax. Under the last Labour government, it was only 25% of all the tax. So that's really quite an achievement. But it goes beyond that. This government has been one of the toughest on tax avoidance and tax evasion in history. We thought, I thought actually that might get a reaction. But may I remind you, therefore, that it was under the last Labour government and the tax system they had that hedge fund managers pay less tax than their cleaners. So that's something to bear in mind when I tell you that we put over £1 billion into tax, pumping down tax avoidance and tax evasion, and we've reclaimed 30 billion from that. David Cameron is leading the G20s, promoting cooperation between 90 countries to clamp down on tax loopholes, and also bringing a new law in the next parliament. Not only people who avoid or evade tax will be prosecuted, but the people who advise them will be prosecuted also. So yes, that is a record to be proud of, and that is an aspiration to be proud of. But to answer your question directly, yes, that would be a corporation tax.
Thank you. The next speaker this side of the room, gentleman's hand up.
Hello there. Yeah, it should be hopefully a reasonably simple, but hopefully quite an interesting question, which is, if you could only choose one thing, what do you think is the biggest issues facing our country at the moment, and what do you think should be done about it? But you only get to choose one.
Okay, we won't start with this. Simon.
The single biggest issue facing the country, I'm not going to say the economy, obviously, that would be far too long message. Actually, you know what? I think pessimism might be one of the biggest issues facing the country at the moment. You know, you go back 10 to 80 years, as America came out of recession, the great man, Franklin Roosevelt, said, you know, we don't fear but fear itself. I said sometimes, I feel this the same way with myself on occasion. That we look around, and yes, we do see inequality. Yes, there's still too many people out of work, despite the number of jobs we've created. There's so much uncertainty. We look at Europe, they're still on the edge of recession. And it's very easy to feel a lack of confidence, to feel brought down, and to really have a lack of hope, especially young people. Again, that's what I saw, spending so many years working with young people. So I think that really, as a whole, on a broad level, one of the biggest problems we face as a country. And again, the answer, in some ways, is quite simple again. We all take responsibility on ourselves to change things. Whether that's, in my case, previously to being in politics, running a youth charity, reaching out, going door to door, spending hours before work, after work, breakfast clubs, after school clubs, saying to kids, there is hope. If you're angry, you feel like afflicted, you know, you want to lash out, hurt someone, the only person that's going to hurt is yourself. You know, there really is no other way that all of us take responsibility, and that has to be reflected in government as well. That goes back to what we've already heard from Imagine. There's the pupil premium, helping disadvantaged pupils. You know, getting a lot more charities with third sector involved in youth provision. You know, and actually some free schools have gone into the pupil referral unit area too and helped change lives there. So it's from top to bottom, and it's a responsibility I think any of us can ignore.
Thank you.
Climate change. If we do not tackle climate change, almost nothing else is going to matter within the next generation. But here's something that's actually very exciting. If we start tackling climate change properly now, we changing our consumption and production and expectations and habits, transforming our economy, transforming our education. If we do it properly, actually we grow different kinds of jobs that can provide us sustainable and renewable jobs. We change the way we look at a whole set of other issues. We start walking and cycling much more, which actually starts to take some of the pressure of our health service, which then in turn will allow the NHS to breathe a bit and to be able to tackle the needs of people right across from babyhood right up. So actually tackling climate change, it's a no-brainer in terms of the survival of this country and indeed the survival of the world. And yet all the governments are scared to really deal with it. Why? Because it means people being told, actually we are all responsible. We individually have to take responsibility for changing our overconsumption, for changing the way in which our expectations, and also we have to take responsibility for putting that pressure on governments with our votes and with everything else to make sure that the governments know that no government can be elected into Parliament unless it has a clear plan to tackle this, the greatest security problem we face. And what are we doing? Spending 100 billion on Trident to go off in the middle of the ocean. This is ridiculous. That is not about security. That is not even about defense. That is about closing your eyes, sticking your head into sand and going, no, 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 no. The real security threat we face is climate change. And if we tackle it together, we can build this country back up and work with the rest of the world.
There's lots of things we could probably all say, but I think for me, the main thing from the surgeries that I hold and the people I speak to is inequality, actually. I think for us, there's an LSE report that I read quite recently which said the biggest threat to our economy is the widening gap between people at the bottom and people at the top, and that's the biggest threat to the economy. What do we do about it? The first is we must make work pay. So half the people who are claiming benefits at the moment, 50% of them are already in work, but it's because work doesn't pay. So the minimum wage is just too low. We've got to introduce the London living wage and the living wage generally. So I'd say that's the first thing. The second thing is, when I talk about inequality, when people are in jobs and they're on a 0-hours contract, not knowing where their next meal is going to come from, not being able to feed their children. I'm a mother in a nursery in quite a deprived area, and one of the mothers told me that she's worried about sending her child to school because he hasn't had anything to eat the night before and nothing to eat in the morning. And they live in the same constituency as me. I've never had to wait around for food. I've been blessed, I've always had food on the table. So my biggest concern is inequality. And I think the way to address that is to make work pay, to have an economy that actually works for everyone, and so that we're not in a situation where people are really feeling the benefits of the economy recovering, and the people at the bottom who can't afford to feed their children and can't afford to put on the heating.
Simple issue, Britain's membership, you believe it. We don't approve of it. We are the only party, the only credible force in British politics that actually wants to get out of the European Union and reassert our own sovereignty, simply because everything else that's been discussed here and now is just so much hot air until we actually reclaim the full powers of Parliament, the responsibility of Parliament to govern this country. Watch this space. We've got Greece at the present moment. There's a problem between Greece and Germany about repaying its debts. I think Greece has now got, I think it's up to the 23rd of April. They've been given a lot of money and they have to start paying it back. If they don't, there's a chance that Greece will fall out of the Eurozone. If Greece falls out of the Eurozone, the whole European Eurozone will start to unwind, which means the European project unwinds. So in fact, it's quite possible the whole thing may just unravel before our very eyes, before the election. So that is something to be keep your eyes on.
So inequality is a major issue. Housing is a major issue. According to a Pew poll in the United Kingdom, most people actually rank religious and ethnic strife in the United Kingdom above the economy as a major issue too. And we know that. We see what's happening in Scotland with the potential rise of the SNP. We see what's happening with far-right street protest movements rising, and we see what's happening with the rise of Islamist extremism. These are all major issues, but if I were to pick one that means a lot to me personally, it's the one for which I accepted the Ice Bucket Challenge in this constituency. And in fact, I was the only candidate who accepted an Ice Bucket Challenge when it was put to them by the Hampstead local newspaper. I dedicated that challenge to a very, very serious issue indeed. And that's the issue of mental health. I dedicated it to mind and calm zone. The reason I did is because more so than road traffic accidents, more so than murder and gang crime, and more so than terrorism, the largest killer of young men in this country is suicide. It's a national tragedy. I was sitting in this very church, in the cafe over there, and I met a man, a young man, Matthew Oxton, and he told me the story of his partner of 13 years who lives in West Hampstead. His young doctor, Muslim partner, who was forcibly outed by his family. And tragically, because his family rejected his homosexuality, he jumped from the top floor of his window and plunged to his death in this very ward of West Hampstead. And it brought tears to my eyes as he was telling the story, and it brought tears to his eyes to tell the story, because he lost someone he had loved and lived with for 13 years. It's the largest killer of young men in this country. I'm delighted that the Democrats have committed to mental health in this way, and have committed to the Paris University treating mental health cases the same as physical health, but a lot more needs to be done to stop our young men killing themselves and to bring the suicide rate down to 0. And that's a commitment I believe to.
More hands going up. We only have 20 minutes left. I promise you guys time. I'd like to move on to the international dimension. If we have a question for that, put your hand up. If we run out, we won't come back to the start. Let's go right at the back. The far corner.
Hi. Do you support the bombing of IS positions in what used to be Iraq? And would you support the bombing of IS positions in Syria and Turkey?
Okay, Mike, I'll start with you this one.
Bringing this back to a pendulum swing, you know, when at 16 years old, I joined a radical Islamist organization because we failed to intervene and stop the genocide in Bosnia. And I was misguided but furious. And unfortunately, the pendulum swung too far the other way. And then we illegally invaded Iraq, which I opposed from a jail cell as a political prisoner in Egypt. And we've got to be careful that the mistakes of foreign policy don't lead us to a lack of intervention, a total passivism, which actually ends up with a genocidal situation abroad, or we go too far and we illegally invade countries. Now that's what almost happened this time around in Iraq, when we lost a vote, when it went first time to our parliament and then went to Congress in the United States. Because the Yazidi population, as a result of our failure to do anything, was almost subject to another genocide on our watch. And we said never again. We need to make sure that never happens again. So at the time I wrote an op-ed piece in the Financial Times, and it was entitled, MPs have made a terrible mistake. And what I meant by that is our voting down what would have been an intervention, not an invasion, and certainly not ground troops in Iraq, but a very specific intervention to provide air cover as requested by the government of Iraq, and as requested at the time by various regional powers, regional governments in the region, to request assistance to go in. I think we should have provided it back then. What I wrote in this op-ed, it's online, you can search it. If we don't intervene, and this is when we lost the vote back 2 years ago, right? So if we don't intervene, in about a year and a half time, then what will happen is that vacuum in the middle will be filled by jihadist terrorists. Because the FSA will be overrun. And actually that's what eventually happened. To the point now where it's far too late, because there is no effective FSA, the Free Syrian Army, on the ground whatsoever. The only people that are controlling the territory in Syria, and those who are dominating the fight, are the jihadists. And unfortunately that's what's happened. So I think now when it comes to dealing with the situation, we cannot arrive at a solution inside Syria without the success of Secretary Kerry's negotiations with Iran. They have to exert pressure, is that my time? They have to exert pressure over Assad because Assad is in the Iranian sphere of influence. But likewise, I think that any intervention must be primarily led by Sunni Arabs. They have to take responsibility. And
Yes, UK Independent Party stand full square behind our armed forces, and we also stand full square behind America. We have Britain has a responsibility as a member of the Security Council of the United Nations. So we would accept America's lead in acting, if you like to use the word or the expression, the world policeman. If that were not the case, if we disagree with that idea, you might like to consider whether the world is being safer with Russia taking over the position of world policeman. Who's going to fill the vacuum? Russia, China, anyone else? Do you think the world has already been safer?
It's always such a delight to come in. Makes my job a lot easier. Everyone must have heard of that, mutually aiding destruction. The Liberal Democrats mentioned that you're aware of the party's policies. I won't go over the in-depth policies. Suffice to say, you've been opposed to trying, as it stands, for a long time. You've been pushing it in the coalition government, but haven't been able to get very far because we only have 8% seats with 24% votes. Personally, though, I subscribe to the view that Professor Hawkins recently professed. That is that the world has a greater chance of ending due to germ warfare and virus being unleashed than it does due to nuclear bombs being never used. And if that's the case, then there's no point having nuclear weapons. Because everyone has come to the conclusion that to use them means the end of the world. In fact, the bigger dangers we face is that the nature of warfare has changed. Now it's about non-state actors who are intent on spreading as much damage and destruction they can within our communities, and they are looking at germ warfare, and they are looking at viruses, unleashing viruses on populations. So no, I don't personally support it. I think it would save us lots of money if we reframe the terms of how we understand war and peace in the modern world.
Hi, I'd like to know a simple question really. What could each of you do here to stop homophobia in religious communities? As many of you know, my fiance passed away outside of Barclays back last July. Common as a result of the passion coming out to his religious family. So I would like to know, I'd like to ask you the question, what could you all do here to stop this from happening to someone else again? I'd like to also ask you for your support. And sorry, this is slightly important. On 18th of April, walking from Hampstead Cemetery, starting a 130-mile journey to raise this issue, raise this topic, so that more people get to talk about it. Because up until last July, many people didn't even know this was an issue. They didn't even know this was an issue right in front of them in their own community. So I'd just like to ask, what can you all do more to try and stop this from happening to anyone else again?
So, Matthew, I didn't know you were in the audience, but thank you for having the courage to do what you do, standing up and speaking today, for having the strength and the resilience to continue. You're a survivor. Obviously, you've set up the Mountain House Foundation, and you're campaigning to raise awareness among religious communities around issues of homophobia. My support is 100% with you. As you know, on various television appearances, I've been challenging homophobia within my own religious community, within the Muslim communities, who have made some strides on this, but have a long way to go still. There are, thankfully now, Muslim voices who are both Muslim and gay, and who are openly speaking out. And as I said on the BBC Free Speech debate program, that I will stand between them and any homophobe within my own community and make sure they never get anywhere near victimizing or bullying gay Muslims. As long as I'm standing, as long as William remains, and as long as my work to challenge extremism within my own communities stand strong, I'll do what I can to bring myself, my voice, my resources, and the resources of my organization to campaign firmly within Islamic communities to liberalize and to help them move forward to a more inclusive approach. And I intend, as I mentioned, to attend your march from here to Birmingham. I'll be here at the graveyard with you and support you 100%.
homosexuality, I think, is a crime against Sharia law, so it's forbidden in Islam, and maybe other religions which actually forbid homosexuality. I don't think they actually go to the extent of actually somebody executing people for it. I stand to be corrected on this, and maybe other religions which do. I apparently caused something of a furor by my announcement at the Hampton High, saying that I would institute a licensing regime for mosques. And what I meant by that was that Islamic clergy would have to conform to the ordinary standards that we expect in a civilized society. And that would mean that they would not get a license to preach if they were preaching death on homosexuals. And any mosque which couldn't find a licensed imam or a licensed clergyman would have to close. So that is basically the idea that I was trying to put forward.
It's really nice to see you here, and I attended the memorial service, as you know, and you at that, and I have to say it was one of the most touching things I've ever been to in my life. Let me tell you something, and Majid's covered quite a lot of it. Sadiq Khan, Shabana Mahmood, Khalid Mahmood, Yasmin Qureshi, former the fifth one, 5 Muslim Labour MPs in Parliament all voted for equal marriage and for gay rights. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing is, I would have done the same as obviously. Second thing to say, I take issue with what Magnus is saying, because it's open to interpretation in Islam. All the rules are open to interpretation. And I think there are organizations that are very unhelpful who pretend to speak for the Muslim community, self-appointed leaders who come forward and say the Muslim community does not agree with homosexuality. The Muslim community have decided that gay rights should not be allowed. Who appointed them? I didn't appoint them. Najib didn't appoint them. So you will have support from large sections of the Muslim community to counter homophobia. We will support you 100%, whichever party we are from, for your foundation, and we will champion gay rights. I was proud to attend the first ever gay marriage in Camden Council at 1 minute past midnight. It was an amazing occasion. I was proud to be there. I'm sorry about what's happened, and words are not going to express how your life has changed. But if there's anything we can do in terms of supporting you, not just from the Muslim community, but from the community generally, who I think have shown you a lot of support and love, we're going to be there. And please, do not misunderstand what's in the press when organizations come forward and pretend to speak for our community, because it's not true.
Thank you so much for that. I'm so sorry for your loss. I take it very, very personally because as a young feminist in the 70s, I began to get very confused because I kept falling in love with other young feminists. And I actually didn't have the courage to come out. I'm the youngest of 8 children from quite a fundamentalist religious Christian background. I couldn't come out while my father was alive. I was too scared to. I was too scared somehow to hurt, that I thought somehow that my being me was going to cause him. And in fact, really, I only came out and I was kind of forced to, because as a Greenham Common woman, one of the major insults that was hurled at us was that we were dirty lesbians, which of course quite a lot of us were, but we were all So there was the assumption when I was going around CND meetings and church halls and talking about getting rid of cruise missiles from there, that we were, all lesbians, or that we were going to speak out against the other lesbians that somehow been in the peace movement into disrepute. And at that point, I would draw a big breath and say, well, actually, I'm here to tell you that you're talking about me. Because I recognized in those days I had long hair and I wore suffragette ribbons in my hair, I could pass. So one of the ways of tackling homophobia is for none of us to pass. For us all to have the courage to say who we are, to be glad who we are, to be proud who we are, to support each other in who we are, and for that to be part of our building our community. But that's not enough, because a lot of the religions do demonize or discriminate, and they find in their holy books ways in which to justify that. The fact is that it's wrong in every single one of them. is sitting at the back, the first Hustings that she's come to with me. And this is the first question we've had directly from that. The other thing is, I actually do, although I've never, I spent half my feminist life arguing against sort of marriage as a bourgeois institution. The fact is that gay marriage is incredibly important, same-sex marriage, because it gives rights. And one of the rights is that we have a right to choose whether or not to get married. But it's a major aspect of people beginning to recognize that love is love is love. And our sexuality is our business. And there should be no institutional or legal discriminations against anyone for who they are and their sexuality.
Sorry for your loss, and I understand that the work, cross-party work that's gone on in finding and passing gay marriage may not be any consolation to you at this time. But what I would say is, and perhaps it's a good note on which to end, you know, all governments in the last decade or more have taken on homophobic bullying, tried to introduce education to schools, so that young people, when they're finding out about their sexuality, don't go through the terrible pain that so many young people go through going into the world more tolerant and more accepting of people. And that's a wonderful thing. And I'd like to say that really one thing all of us in this room can be assured of is that whoever wins the election, that work will go on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's it. No more questions for Asia. Appreciated to the candidates taking 2 hours.
Listen to us. So thank you all.
Don't forget to register to vote by the 20th of April if you're not registered.
I don't know if you get to vote.
Yeah.